Change isn't just coming, it's already here. This is Ask for Change podcast, hosted by leadership expert Meridith Elliott Powell. Brings you weekly conversations with leaders and experts who are redefining success in a world of disruption. Let's begin today's journey and turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage.
Let's turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage. I am super excited for the show today. Welcome to the Ask for Change podcast, the show where we dive into exactly what you need to know to turn uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. Start controlling all this change rather than all this change controlling you. And today we got an awesome guest. I'm going to title her the disruptor. It is Voie. I mean, what a journey this woman has had. I mean, not only did she work in a male-dominated industry, and let me tell you, I thought I worked in a male-dominated industry, but she makes mine look like a piece of cake. And not only did she work in that industry, but she really revolutionized the industry. So welcome to the ultimate game changer. Welcome to the show, Voie. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you, Meredith. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I am excited to be on because we have a lot to talk about. Not only your book, but your journey and just the work that you have done really disrupting industries. And, disruption is such an important word in today's marketplace. But Ellen, you're the founder of the Women in Trucking Association. You have spent years in this male-dominated industry, just shifting the gears of gender diversity. So talk a little bit about how you got on this journey. I mean, how did you even get into the world of trucking to begin with?
So when I stand up in front of audiences and I ask women to raise their hand if they in high school or college said, I want to work in the supply chain, very few women raise their hands. And I'm the same way. I actually wanted to be in broadcast journalism. But I was working at a steel fabricating plant in the drafting department because I had taken drafting in high school. And they came to me and they said, we'd like to move you into the traffic department and we'll send you to school for traffic and transportation management, which is basically shipping. And so, I mean, at the time I was 19 years old and, I thought, okay, might as well. And that's how I started my career in the traffic and transportation and supply chain industry. It was inadvertent, but here I am, still here.
Did you love it right from the start? Did you, did you feel like you'd found a passion in it?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I always say that the trucking industry isn't about trucks. It's not about loads. It's not about warehouses. It's really about the people. And you find drivers and everybody in the industry are just very hardworking, humble people who just kind of like, well, that's what I do, especially the driver population, which is predominantly male and always has been. But it's just a humble group of people who really are so important. And I don't think anyone really understands how important this industry is until something stops.
Yeah.
So when everything goes as planned, it's like, oh, okay, that's all good. But then when the supply chain stops or there's an accident on the road or, a pandemic hits, then suddenly we're important.
So when did you start on the path of disruption in the industry? And was that intentional or did it just sort of start to happen? You saw places that needed shift and change?
So I was working for I was working for a trucking company. After the steel fabricating plant, I did consulting for about 18 years while I raised my two children. And during that time, I also got my bachelor's and my master's in communication. And then I went and worked for a nonprofit, which got me into the nonprofit world. I was recruited by Schneider National. We had 14,000 trucks, very large trucking company. And they said, figure out how to attract and retain non-traditional groups. And that included women. So they said, figure out what do women look for in a company? What do women look for in a truck? What do women look for in a culture? So I started doing my homework. And believe it or not, I was getting my pilot's license and I belonged to an association called Women in Aviation International. And one day I was on my way to my pilot's lesson and I thought, well, why do we have an association for female pilots and we don't have one for women in the trucking industry? Yeah. And so because I had that nonprofit background, I got an attorney, got 12 very powerful women in the industry, put together the bylaws, all the articles of incorporation. In March of 2007, Women in Trucking was born.
So, so why are there not women in the trucking industry, or why were there not women in the trucking industry?
Well, the reason is a lot of women will look at a truck and think, that's not for me. They don't even consider themselves driving a truck, much less working in the marketing department or HR even, at a trucking company. They just don't picture themselves in the trucking industry. And so by telling stories and highlighting influential women in trucking and distinguished women in logistics and having a member of the month and a driver of the year, we could share their stories. And we had a woman on the Megyn Kelly show. She was a driver, and she talked about how she loves driving in the morning when she watches the sunrise. Our phones just rang off the hook, and emails, and because women said, I didn't know I could do it, but if she can do it, I can do it.
Why does the trucking industry or any industry need gender diversity?
Well, I can tell you, so Women in Trucking represents all women in the industry, not just drivers. But I will tell you, you've got 80,000-pound truck going down the road, okay? Who do you want behind the wheel of that truck? The American Transportation Research Institute found that male commercial drivers were 14% more likely to be involved in a crash in every statistically significant area. So women are already safer. Women are more risk averse, and that includes in the cab of the truck, and that includes in the boardroom. So, women think differently and come to decision conclusions differently. But I'm going to go back to the truck. It used to be when I started Women in Trucking, suddenly these trucking companies were like, oh, we didn't think about half the population, driving our trucks. And then they thought, oh, good, they can fill a seat. And I'm like, no. I don't want you to hire women because they fill a seat. I want you to hire women because women are safer, better with equipment, better with customers, better with paperwork. I want you to see the value in what women bring to this industry. Don't just think you're filling a seat.
Yeah, I get that completely. That it isn't diversity just for diversity's sake. It's diversity because it's good for the company and good for the,
Yes.
Good for the organization. So how long did it take for you to be taken seriously, for lack of a better way to put it, in the industry? I mean, I think some of the things about bias or not seeing yourself in an industry, a lot of it is really, people aren't even, it's not that they're mean about it. It's just not something that they think about, or something that they open a door to. So, at what point did you realize, as a young woman, that you wanted to move up in the organization, and how hard was it to crack those ceilings, so to speak?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because the hardest part of starting a nonprofit association is establishing credibility. You have to, so I stand in front of people and I go, oh, I'm going to bring more women in the industry. And they're like, so how are you going to do that? We had no data, no statistics. In fact, trucking companies didn't even know what percentage of their drivers were female. So I started challenging them, and I go, oh, wow, why do you have 3% female drivers and you have 13% female drivers? What are you doing? What are your best practices? And started studying. And then everywhere I go, Meridith, everywhere, I'd raise my hand. I don't care if it was insurance companies, government agencies, you name it. I'd raise my hand and I go, do you have it broken down by gender? And they'd always look at me, they go, no. And so they started thinking, well, maybe gender might be an issue here. And then the DEI initiatives started really pushing that. So they had to start keeping track. And once they started keeping track and realized what women brought to the industry, whether it's in the boardroom or, as mechanics, safety directors, drivers, whatever, once they started realizing, oh, wow, our numbers are pretty dismal and their numbers are pretty good. How can we have more diversity in our company? So I think it was more starting to set some standards and create some challenges and making more awareness.
Yeah. And so then how hard was it to start to get other women on board? You mentioned telling stories, but what other strategies did you use?
Well, first of all, listening to members. So the very first year, my goal was to hit 1,000 members, and we did. We hit 1,000 members the first year. But part of it was, as I mentioned, I had worked for another nonprofit in the trucking industry. So people knew me, but they would tell me straight out, we're going to join the first year because we like you. We've seen what you've done with this other organization, but you better produce. And I also need to mention that it was March of 2007, which is right at the beginning of the recession. That was not a good time. But so started asking the members, what are your pain points? What can we as an association do? And a couple things that really made a difference was getting the attention. Ryder Trucking said, well, these how can we change the trucks so they're more ergonomically comfortable for women? And then the truck stop said, well, how can we be more, accommodating to female drivers? It used to be that in the truck stops, it was a shower like in a locker room in a high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like I used to go with my former husband, and he would have to stand at the door so I could quick go in and shower, and he wouldn't let anyone else in. So they've changed that. Now all the showers are individual. It doesn't matter, gender. But the truck manufacturers started saying, wow, you actually have to sit on a pillow or put blocks on your feet, or you can't open the hood, or you can't see over the dash. And so we started representing our members and having a voice and saying, we need to change this industry. We want women and smaller statured men to feel just as comfortable in the cab of a truck as their 98th percentile driver that they used to design trucks for.
Yeah.
So things like that. And Meredith, I would stand in front of groups and I'd say, so how many of you have uniforms that are cut for women? And they'd look down and like, oh, I know. And all the women would have to wear men's uniforms, and whether they were polo shirts or uniforms, and we started having a voice and saying, no, you need to order women's cut. And they're like, yeah, you're right.
So let's talk about your book, From Dispatcher to Disruptor, One Woman's Journey to Drive Gender Diversity in the Trucking Industry. What inspired you to write the book? I mean, if I had to describe the book, I think it was a little bit memoir and then a little bit, a little bit of things that other people, not only in the trucking industry, but everywhere, could learn about, really not only how to drive gender diversity, but I think more importantly, the importance of driving gender diversity.
Well, so everyone always said, you need to write a book, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I read stories of women, who wrote books, and I thought, oh, I don't know if my story's that important. And then I got enough encouragement from people who said, you really should share how you started and grew the Women in Trucking Association and the challenges that you faced along the way. And so you're right, it is part memoir, it's part starting a nonprofit, growing it, the challenges I faced along the way, and also the fact that there's a time when the founder needs to leave.
Yeah.
And we worked with Mary Kelly, love her, about succession planning, and me stepping out and turning it over to people who have a much different viewpoint of how to run a nonprofit, because I was the founder. So I chase shiny objects.
Yeah. That
spreadsheets and didn't like budgets and things like that. So it was time for me to leave, and I'm glad that I wrote the book, because it is the story. Anyone who I want history to not be changed, because how over the years the stories change, and like I went to the Women in Trucking conference last week and found out that they rewrote the mission statement. And that breaks my heart. There was nothing wrong with the mission statement, so in my mind, but of course that's my founder syndrome speaking.
Right.
So now the history is in black and white. We all know about how Women in Trucking was started, and now they need to take it from there.
Yeah. So what do you think were some of the biggest challenges in starting Women in Trucking Association?
Well, getting the data, because there was no data. I mean, it was unbelievable. I remember some very large carriers didn't even track what percentage of their mechanics or safety directors are. And then we started tracking what percentage of the CEOs were women, and it was almost none. And how many women were on the publicly traded companies, their boards, and that was dismal. But we started sending out reports about it, like, oh, look, the average, corporation, outside the industry has this percentage of women on their boards or directors, and in the trucking industry, it's much less or fewer. So and then going back to the companies that did have higher percentage of women in leadership roles, and we'd start highlighting them and saying, oh, look at this company and look at their profits.
Yeah. So what are you most proud of?
I guess, so last week we had the Women in Trucking Conference, the Accelerate Conference, and I'm most proud when people come up to me and said, you made a difference in my life. I had a woman come up and said, it was career changing for me. And so I think that, I hope that I'm a motivator, but also show people that, if you are persistent and you are, don't give up. You know that, Meredith.
Yes.
And also, one of the things I'm really proud of is the fact that I lifted other people up. I know I did. I know that the driver population is doing much better because they feel proud of what they're doing. I never use the term trucker. I always say professional driver because I think labels matter. I would always ask our drivers, like, how do you feel about this and what can we change here? And I feel like I empowered so many women and young women in supply chain to just go beyond their comfort zone a little bit more each time. And the more you do that, the more you're going to find out what you're capable of doing.
Probably one of the biggest things that I was struck with in the book is the fact that the power of small change, almost like a snowball that, rolling downhill. Can you talk about that a little bit? It isn't like you tried to completely disrupt the industry all at once.
No, there were some things that I wish I could have changed even more. And that's the subject of harassment. Because it's we call it male populated environment. A lot of men think that women shouldn't be doing their jobs, whether they're mechanics or safety directors or drivers or whatever, or they think that women are taking their jobs, which we know is not the case. But there's still some, old biases. And so it's really pointing out the unconscious bias that whether it's in the office or whether it's out on the road or at the truck stop or whatever, and saying, we want you to think about this. This could be your mom. This could be your sister. This could be your grandma that's driving a truck. And how would you want her to be treated? So the change really comes when you make people look at the world differently and start realizing that, wow, maybe she's not taking a job away from someone, and maybe she does have a family to support, and maybe I do need to be more supportive.
Is there, what would you say were the biggest, were people receptive? I'm looking for the biggest obstacles that you face. Were people receptive to this right from the start? I think about the organizations that I've tried to make change in when change has been disrupted, and you meet a lot of headwinds. And yes. I'm just curious if that was your experience as well.
Do you know the worst people were to try to convince to support women in trucking were the queen bees, the women who had been out there for 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years. Not all of them, but a lot of them would say, well, you weren't there for me. Why should I support you? So you know what my reaction would be? I would say, oh, you're right. But you have so much wisdom and insight that you can share with the newer generation coming in. And we would really appreciate for you to share that knowledge. And of course, then they like that.
Yeah.
But they were the hardest ones to convince that they needed to be a part of this organization because nobody was there for them. So they were hesitant to help, moving forward. But had to convince them.
So for any listener out there right now who's thinking about, the fact that there's, whether it's gender diversity or not, but they're thinking about disruption, they're really thinking that this organization could do more, be more. experience more. What is your advice to get them started?
Well, be bold. You have to believe in yourself. And a lot of people don't want to ask for things. And I talk about that a lot in the book. It's like people want to help. They want, if they believe in your mission, they want to support you. So when I said, oh, I want to build this tractor trailer with a moving display and an educational, I went to Walmart and like, would you give us a trailer? Sure. And got a $65,000 simulator from ATS, and then I wanted to give away a truck. And I asked Aero Truck Sales, would you give me a truck? And they're like, okay.
Wow.
You have to be really bold and ask, because if people really believe in your mission and they want to support you, they're going to figure out a way to help you in that mission. And there's so many people out there that see the value in bringing more women into the industry. I love our male allies, just love male allies who are, they'll say, how do I get more women as drivers? How do I get more women in the C-suite? How do I get more women, in upwardly mobile management positions? And then I'd start talking about unconscious bias, or I'd talk about, this is funny. I would have men come up to me and say, oh, Ellen, 80% of my office staff is women. And I'd say, yeah, are they in HR and marketing? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, let's get them into operations. Let's get them into safety. Let's get them into, the jobs that they're going to learn different skills, because that's what we need. We need to really, if we want to have more diversity, we have to get women in roles that they might not have thought that they were capable of doing, but they really are.
Right. It's, did you get much, women believing that they, struggling to make the move into operations? I'm curious, did you have to go into high schools or colleges and start to recruit women to make these shifts?
Can't go into high schools because can't drive a truck till you're 21. So as far as driver population, you can't. But colleges definitely. Although I do have to mention that I found out the Boy Scouts had a transportation patch and the Girl Scouts didn't. So we created a supply chain patch. And so we actually did hundreds of Girl Scout events called, we had an activity book. It was called Trucks Are for Girls. And then we had an activity book that talked about how the grain goes from the field to the bakery in a truck and that sort of thing. So introducing to the next generation. We also came up with a doll, truck driver doll. So we went actually younger than the high schools, but that's more just to put, the thoughts in their minds that they can do this job. But going into colleges, I started a foundation as well. And so we give a lot of scholarships to women who are getting careers, going to school for supply chain careers, whether it's driving, maintenance, safety, or even working in the office. We help them with their tuition.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it's hard to believe, but we are basically at the end of this podcast. And I always like to end with 2 questions. You can answer them any way you want to. How do people find out about you, your book, the work that you have done? And then my second question is, what's next for you?
So they can go to ellenvoie.com, or if they want to learn about women in trucking, I would say go to womenintrucking.org. Everything is on there. The book is my website is more about the book. And what's next for me? I actually would like to write another book and take advice from women who have been in supply chain and ask them, what would you tell your younger self? And write a book, because there's so many young women coming into the industry, and I think that would be so insightful. So that's my next book, Meridith.
That's fantastic. Well, we'll definitely have you on when you get that one, published. Thanks for being such a force of nature, such an incredible leader, a real game changer. I mean, there's so many strategies and things that you talk about in the book that can really be applied to any industry, anybody looking and needing to make disruption. So thank you, Ellen, so much for joining us today. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll see you right back here next week for another episode of Ask for Change. And together, we're going to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. I'll see you next week.